My question is distilling, is that grace available to everyone then?
Did you hear the question? This is where it all lines up right here. This is the soteriological question of the decade, of the century, of the millennial, of church history. Here's the soteriological question. Is God's grace available to all? Is God's grace available to all? Now, before you hear their answer, I want you to hear the Bible's answer, okay? I just pulled up 4 or 5 verses. Could have pulled up dozens more. Just 4 or 5 just to top it off for you, okay? Psalm 145:9. The Lord is good to all. All means all people, or what? His mercy is over all that he has made. That pretty much clarifies it, doesn't it? Everything he's made. His mercy is over all that he has made. He is good to all. That is the answer to the question. That would be a great answer. Ma'am, I'd like to tell you, you just asked, is God's grace, is his mercy available for all? I'd like to read from you the psalmist. The Lord is good to all. His mercy is over all he has made. What a great answer that would have been, right? That's not the answer they give, but that would have been a great answer. Or how about Titus 2:11, Paul's answer? For grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people. Not all of the elect people, not all kinds of people, not people of all tribes or all people. What a great answer that would have been. Is God's grace available to all? Sister, let me tell you this. For God's grace has appeared, bringing salvation for all people. You can trust in that. That would be a great answer for this lady right now, wouldn't it? What about Romans 3:11-32? Paul, again, answering this question. You know, sister, I appreciate your question, and I hear what you're asking. You're asking, is God's grace available to all? You know what? It seems like God has consigned all to disobedience, and he has. By the fall, he's given men the direction, go take your wealth and squander it, like the father said to the prodigal. And it seems as if God's consigned all over to disobedience. Here, go your own way. Follow the way of Adam. Follow the way of Eve. Follow the sinfulness of this world, and given them over to the depravity of their hearts and their sinfulness. And it may seem like, therefore, God's grace doesn't cover all. God's mercy isn't available to all. But I want you to hear what Paul says. For God has consigned all to disobedience so that he may have mercy on them all. That would have been a great answer too. Fortunately, it's not the answer they give. I would have loved them to quote from John 12:32. And I, when I am lifted up on the earth, Jesus saying this, by the way, I will draw all people to myself. So who will he draw to himself? I will draw all people to myself. In other words, once I have accomplished the redemptive plan that God has sent me here to accomplish, and I've pulled together my remnant from Israel, the apostles that have been chosen, set apart for this noble cause, to bring the salvation message to the world through inspiration. Once I've accomplished that, once I'm raised up from the earth, I will send the gospel through my chosen apostles so as to draw all people to myself. Those would all have been great answers to this question. But unfortunately, this is what you got instead.
Hope to be saved.
You mean regenerative grace?
Mm-hmm.
No.
Okay.
You know, that's what the whole point is, that God is not obligated to give saving grace to anybody. And he sovereignly determines to be...
By the way, there's no such word as regenerative grace ever talked about in the Bible, okay? It's just not, it's just he has to add these extra words in there to make his theology fit. And it's just, it frustrates me, and I love RC. I genuinely love the 3 men that are on this stage. I have a lot of respect for them. But this is just a blind spot for them, and I think they're making some huge errors, and they're leading many people within the body astray on this question. When a simple question like, is God's grace available to all, and you can't answer like the Bible answered in those few passages that I picked, and I could have picked so many more, then this is the problem for your systematic. When you can't highlight the love and God's provision for every single person, that yes, every single person can and should be saved. And some people say, well, okay, well, that doesn't make any sense. What about Pharaoh? Pharaoh, he obviously didn't have the grace of God provided for him, or they can name some, Old Testament, priest of Baal, or all these other people that I've heard thrown out. What about this person? What about Judas? And what about this person, that person? Are you saying that grace was available for them? Are you saying they could have been saved? Yes. Yes. Well, no, that surely not, because God would have known, and God knew that they would reject him, and so therefore, and it gets into all the philosophical aspects of what God knew beforehand and what God did, blah 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 blah. I'm just saying, time out. Let's listen. I know there's some philosophical question. I know there's some deep mysteries regarded here, but I'm reminded again of 1 Samuel chapter 23 when David is trapped in Keilah, and he prays to God and he says, God, Saul is after me. He's going to kill me. Will he come to Keilah, and will the city give me over for being destroyed? And God says yes. Unequivocally, he says, yes, Saul's coming. And yes, when he comes, Keilah, the city, will give you over and you will be killed. Is that something God foreknew would happen? Yes. Did it end up happening? Nope. Once David prayed and asked this question, he found out he got out of Dodge. Well, got out of Keilah, I should say. He left. And then what happened? Once Saul heard that David had left, he decided not to go to Keilah. So what's that mean? Well, mysteriously, in God's foreknowledge and the understanding of foreknowledge, I mean, we get baffled by these things because we're in time. We're finite creatures. I mean, goodness sake, we get baffled when we watch different episodes of what's that called? Back to the Future. With the Back to the Future shows. My kid's been watching it recently, the old Back to the Future shows. Our brains don't quite work on the timeline. We're kind of jumping back and forth in time and trying to figure out how all that works. And we get confused by, okay, this Doc is talking to that Doc through a letter in the future, and how does that all work? And our brains explode when we try to think of different timelines of the different linear ways of thinking. Our brains don't work that way, but we got to step out just to the philosophical and go back to the theological and just simply say, what does the Bible say about what God has provided? What does the Bible say about his love and provision and his grace provided for all people? And how that all works together. Yes, there's some mystery involved in that, and that's one of the reasons I show grace to my Calvinistic brothers and my open theist brothers and all of them in between on the spectrum of how we deal with the mystery of God's knowledge and how that all works together. But I think we have to be very clear about what the Scripture says with regard to man's responsibility to respond within time and space to what he has provided, and that anyone and everyone can respond because God's grace has been provided sufficiently to all people so that all may be saved. For Pharaoh, yes. For Judas, yes. Now, if Judas didn't have to become a money-hungry, hardened individual. He did, and God therefore used him in his hardened and rebellious state to bring about a good purpose through his rebellion. Doesn't mean that he was fated to become that person. And that may be mysterious and difficult for you to understand, but I think it's a biblical, very biblically sound way. Same with Pharaoh. You said, well, okay, if Pharaoh hadn't have done that, and if Pharaoh didn't grow up to become the person that he did, then that whole plan would have fell apart and God would have been thwarted and all this other stuff. Well, no, I don't think it works that way. I think God has the ability to know and to use people in their rebellion for his purposes, but that doesn't mean he predetermines or necessitates their choices so as to bring about those things. And for us to understand that, yes, it's very difficult, but I think we have to remain biblical, and we don't need to promote a more fatalistic way of understanding in which people walk away, like in these question-answer times, like this poor lady is going to possibly do, to walk away thinking that there are large groups of people who do not ever have the opportunity to respond to God's love and goodness and his graciousness. I think Romans 1 does away with those excuses. I think that it's very clear that God has made himself known, that all people may believe in the truthfulness of who he is so as to be saved, because God has provided graciously the revelation that people need for all people to respond to his graciousness, that the light of God has been made available to all men, and therefore all stand without excuse. I can't think of a better excuse in the world than what the Calvinistic worldview teaches. Can you? Some people, a matter of fact, a large majority, it seems, of people are born in a condition that they cannot love and willingly accept the things of God. They are born hated, in a sense, salvifically of their Maker. They're not loved. They're not provided atonement for. They're not provided the means by which to believe. because obviously grace and the faith hasn't been granted or given to every single one of them, or the ability to respond to God through some effectual means hasn't been given to every single one of them. So some of them are born in a condition where they hate God and could not do anything other, and yet somehow they're responsible even though they can't respond. They're held culpable for the sins of the greatest grandparents instead of their own decisions, and they will spend eternity separated from God in a place called hell for reasons beyond their control. I cannot see how that's not a perfect excuse for unbelief. I was born unable to believe. What better excuse is there for a person than I was born, created by my Maker, unable to believe, and never given the means or opportunity to do so? I can't think of a better excuse than that, and yet exactly what Calvinism is ultimately teaching, and it needs to be rejected soundly.